it absolutely matters, how much, not only how much you know, but how much you're willing to learn, I would say, right? So
Right,
nobody's
right,
going to know everything. And you have to have that curious mindset to figure stuff out. There's going to be things that aren't in a book somewhere or a new scenario even. So I think
right.
as long as you have that aptitude, willingness to learn, that's more valuable than even being smart, in my opinion.
Welcome to Blue Team Diaries, the podcast that celebrates and honors the professionals who work tirelessly to defend their organizations and those who build tools to support defenders. In each episode, host Peter Manev invites his guests to share their stories and experiences in a fun and lighthearted conversation. Blue Team Diaries is sponsored by Stamus Networks, a global provider of network-based threat detection and response solutions. Learn more at stamus-networks.com.
Hey, Tony Wilson is an IT security director at Wolters Kluwer. He's responsible for supporting the CISO and divisional CIO, CTOs in developing, aligning, and implementing the global information security strategy. As one of the lead incident handlers during the infamous Target Corporation data breach of 2013 and its aftermath, he has an acute appreciation for the value of sound information security. He holds a bachelor's degree in MIS and has obtained over a dozen certifications, including CISSP, CISM, and GCIH. He has also taught a cybersecurity bootcamp at the University of Minnesota and maintains mentor relationships with his former students. Tony was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, and will debate anyone over its superiority over Minneapolis. He's closer to 50 than 30, but still enjoys to break a sweat by staying active and lifting weights. Other hobbies include blockchain investment, serverless architecture engineering, and cocktail experimentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Wilson. Hey, Tony, welcome. Can you please share a cool project you've been working on recently?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, I'm part of an initiative where we can establish an environment where we can better support either government customers or state customers. And this is based on the NIST 853 framework for FedRAMP. And this is something where in the past, we've tried to address it just customer by customer based on their needs and not fully jumping into entertaining a FedRAMP environment. And state ramp is another similar requirement that we're seeing more. So it's kind of nice to be on a project now where we're able to be a bit more proactive and start with really just understanding what is the business need, what are their customers asking for, being able to translate that into requirements, and then ultimately perform gap assessments so that we can identify based on our current control set, what are we meeting? So, this is across the board, but if we want to think about from a network standpoint, obviously things like your IDS, IPS are going to come into play, or your web application firewall, and just having some candid conversations with the different business units to understand where they sit currently and what that journey is going to look like to actually get them
Mhm.
in a FedRAMP environment. So I think for me, one of the reasons why that's cool is it's because it's taking a part of the entire journey. Whereas in previous roles, if you're focused primarily on blue team, you don't always have a full appreciation for what is the customer impact or what is even the business impact. So
All the
I think
surrounding.
yeah, so I think this being kind of a full life cycle experience, and also, to get my hands dirty a little bit, I think is a very cool initiative.
Awesome, awesome. So, okay, if you allow me, a little bit of a curveball. easy or tough? I mean, you're following basically a guideline, a certification, and similar things like that. Is it a similar kind of procedure, or it really depends on a per case basis, so to speak? How have you found it out so far?
Do you mean in terms of achieving FedRAMP
Yeah,
authorization?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it can be difficult because there are things that are, I guess, black and white. And then there are things that are defined either based on the organization or the agency. So for that, you really have to translate that into one, what is your risk tolerance, as well as what are the supporting services or platforms that will enable you to do those types of things. And that's typically the biggest challenge of FedRAMP authorization. The controls, they can be easy to implement, but
Mm-hmm.
it's balancing the controls and how much you'll invest there with consideration for the boundary, right? FedRAMP is all
Okay,
about the
okay,
boundary. So if all the activities are taking place within the boundary and they're compliant with those controls, then you can manage that.
right.
The more you expand the boundary, the more things you have to have meet that high level of uh, rigor.
Got it, understood. And it must be like maybe a little bit of a different project each time, depending on as we were mentioning, as the cases and all that stuff. So it's not easy. I gather it's not easy. And out of curiosity, does what makes it not so easy? Is it the infrastructure? Is it the software layer of all applications? Is it just the modern day world of dispersed infrastructure and cloud services, apps, and SaaS services, and all that stuff? Which part is not exactly? Which part is the most difficult, if I may ask so?
Yeah, I think part of it just has to do with the sheer number of controls. And for all of those controls, you need to have very tight documentation and what they call a system security plan or SSP, which is for every control, is it applicable to you? If so, provide an implementation statement for how you're satisfying that control. So again, it's not good enough just to have that control and be operating it effectively. You have to document that as your environment changes. You need to make those types of updates as well too. And then beyond that, I think it is also partly just understanding what you can take credit for from a
Mm-hmm.
public cloud provider, as an example. So let's say if you're on Microsoft Azure, their commercial version of that, you can inherit various controls. But for others that you can't inherit from them, then it's understanding what will your coverage be. And then even for the agency that you're providing that service for, there may be controls that they're responsible for as well too. So it's kind of just figuring out who's responsible for what and then keeping that up to date on an ongoing basis.
So, like, you have to always keep up. Naturally, you always be up to date when you keep up with it. Okay, okay. I can understand how is that difficult, especially nowadays. Absolutely. In such changing environments, in such adversaries that we're facing, and all those things, I'm assuming you could maybe share a no crap or close call moment with us when, for example, you were nearly breached, but you managed to avoid disaster or something like that, if that's all right. Can you share a moment like that?
Yeah, I think I have an example. Maybe it doesn't quite fit exactly into that, but
That's all right.
this is kind of an ongoing blue team activity that I was involved with when I was working at a large retailer. And it was very interesting because it evolved over time. And ultimately, there weren't any, let's say, material exposure because of that, but there was impact. So essentially, what happened was there were credential stuffing attacks, which
Mhm.
should we just assume the audience is familiar with that, or should I provide a brief explanation?
No, maybe a brief explanation will help out too. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So with a credential stuffing attack, typically how that is pulled off is you're taking some set of credentials, could be from a breach. So let's say the LinkedIn breach, right? You have who knows how many tens of thousands of combinations of username
Mhm.
and password.
Yep.
And let's say many people are reusing that same set of credentials for LinkedIn as on their bestbuy.com account. So with the credential stuffing attack, you will just load up all of those credentials from some other breach, and then you will automate the trial and error of those passwords. And of course, if there's no multi-factor authentication, you can do quite a lot of login attempts very quickly. And then once you identify which ones you can successfully log into, what we ended up observing is that there'd be multiple crime networks that are participating. So maybe stage one
Oh,
is
okay.
verify which credentials work, and then stage two is hand those off to a fraudster so they can log into the account, maybe change the address, make a purchase, and then stage three you'll have a mule that is collecting the uh, the purchased items, and then maybe there's even a fourth group that is going to try and sell those on some other network. So that's kind of the general.
So like a
Over,
proper organization, like a criminal
yeah,
organization.
yeah, it's very organized. So I guess just going back to your question of something that could have been a breach or a larger incident. This is something when I was working at the SOC kind of came on our radar initially just from a standpoint of we're getting a high volume of traffic to the website. And, we started off just whack-a-mole blocking IP addresses. Oh, it's coming from here, it's coming from there. And then they would revise their tactics. So now we're getting, instead of, 5 to 6 IPs, we're getting, 20 to 30 IP addresses. So
Also, they're like adapting as you are at it. So cat and mouse, so to speak. Okay. Okay.
exactly, yeah. So then we had Akamai WAF in front of it, so we took advantage of Akamai's rate throttling. So X
Right.
number of requests per second come in, it'll temporarily and dynamically block that IP address. But then they started using a botnet that was very distributed, so they can
Oh
have a
boy.
lower speed but still be able to get it in. So then we had to take advantage of any blacklisting that we could, but then we actually started looking at the headers and trying to identify different
Hmm.
patterns that we could block off of. So um, maybe we would pierce into the X forwarded for and try and find out various IP addresses, or if they are using unique user agents, we could block off of that. Or if there's ASNs that have bad reputations, we could block based off of that as well. So then after that, they were still able to ultimately, I think, just through an expanded botnet, get through some of that. And the stage we went to after that was utilizing a company that would do better identification of the source of it based on different things that could be observed from the browser that they're using, or not only the browser, but even like what what type of um,
Like the type of traffic they were like coming at you or something like that.
yeah, that as well as what is the specific makeup of the configuration for how they have their screen size set, and
Hmm.
all these other things that you can interpret. So it's a little bit more dynamic. So
Okay. Okay.
again, very complex, and there was still some impact, but over time, I think that was a win in the big picture because we were able to have some really reactive measures that made it more difficult for them to make their progress. We were able to coordinate with the fraud team to be able to, even if they make a purchase, be able to cancel some orders, and then to ultimately get some additional tooling that could help us be more effective and less alert fatigue and more automation to try and address some of that.
Wow, awesome. But that, what you described is actually, yeah, quite revealing, super interesting. It seems like a super persistent effort. As you were improving or adding more to the defenses, they were changing tactics on
It,
par, so to speak, which is a little bit worrying, at least to me.
Yeah, exactly. I took it very personal. Every day, I'm kind of observing what they're doing, and like one of the revelations for me at the time was when I noticed a lot of it was coming from this VPN because we didn't always know if it was legitimate or not, and then
Mhm.
I looked up one of the domains and it was tied to hide my ass, right? Like
Okay,
hide my ass, what's that, right? So like, okay, this is obviously illegitimate, and like things like that really helped me make the business case so that we could get a tool just tracking the whole pattern over time and making it clear that our existing defenses weren't being effective. And even
right,
though MFA is much more common today, back then it wasn't, right? So you had
right.
resistance from the business of, do we really want to make our customers do this? And they weren't ready for it at the time.
Well, that's a very, very interesting case that you're sharing, and thank you very much for doing that. I don't think we had such a cool case, or at least from that perspective before. What strikes me here is that again they were changing tactics, and they had a botnet at their disposal. I mean, they were clearly, at least from my impression from what you're describing, they were clearly going at it kind of well prepared for it. If that happens, if this happens, they had ways to actually amplify the attack or respond to it and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that sounds a bit scary, actually, to be very honest, because that's a lot of dedication. It means that they were prepared. They were preparing for this, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that coin, which is interesting, is that they probably had all of those capabilities to begin with, but they're only working as hard as they need to, and not burning tradecraft unnecessarily.
Right, right, okay. Out of curiosity, do you have any recommendations for defenders and things like that based out of this experience? What's like, not all of us have all the tools in place, all the tools that we want in place all the time. We have to make the business case, as you mentioned. Any
Right.
any advice you could give to us?
Yeah, so I'd say the number one thing is if multi-factor or a CAPTCHA isn't already in place, to really, even if it's not mandatory, to have that as a configurable option. That's
Mm,
going to be one of the best defenses. But let's say that's in place or not in place, and you still have traffic that's getting through, then I think the next best thing is, you want to eliminate anything that's obvious. So if you can find a good reputation list for bad, ASNs or networks, things like that, incorporate that into your web application firewall. Hopefully you have one. But beyond that, at some point you're actually going to need to look into the host headers. So
mhm.
aside from just user agent things like that, that you can actually look at the payloads and things like that. That's where you're gonna have the best opportunity to create a signature that is less trivial for them to change.
Right. Okay. Okay. Understood. Understood. Well, thank you for those insights. So with so many different with so many adversaries, with so many different capabilities, and like so many tools out there to choose from. Um, so far, in your view, in your career, what is your go-to tool that you use every day and cannot live without? Is there such a tool? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful. I think one, and maybe this isn't as relevant now, just I think given with many people working from home, but like in an office scenario where you have end users where their workstations might get compromised and you need to log in and troubleshoot or pull some data. We were using sysinternals quite a bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
aside from like PS exec, that might be a way that we remote into another computer. And I'm sure, depending on the organization, they may have like official tools that can do that
Right.
more elegantly, but kind of like a, a quick and dirty way, PS exec, that's something that we use quite a bit. Similarly, when it comes to the network side of things, domain tools, just either domain tools or just looking up the registries specifically to try and get the initial reputation. Use those quite a bit. So Shodan as well too, just from the standpoint of trying to get an understanding of do we have exposure or what other assets of ours may be out there. In a lot of organizations that I've worked with, um, didn't really have a great inventory for what is our web presence, so
Mm-hmm.
used Shodan quite a bit as well too.
Right. Right. Okay. And out of curiosity as well, so do you think the tool is as important as the person using it, or I mean, how does
Um,
this is the vicious circle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends at what tier they're operating within the stock, right? So, for somebody entry level, then yeah, maybe they're not going to have the task where they're doing as much of the interpretation. If they're just doing that initial triage, things like that, then surely they can, learn how to use a tool and maybe not really understand what it's doing or what to do with the output of that tool. But once you're level 2 and above, let's say, then yeah, it absolutely matters, how much, not only how much you know, but how much you're willing to learn, I would say, right? So
Right.
nobody's
Right.
going to know everything. And you have to have that curious mindset to figure stuff out. There's going to be things that aren't in a book somewhere or a new scenario even. So I think
Right.
as long as you have that aptitude, willingness to learn, that's more valuable than even being smart, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more here, actually. To be very honest with you, because the security industry is kind of one of those industries where there's always something new, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how young or old a colleague is; they can always show you something you did not know and things like that. So that's very, very fascinating, at least for
Oh
me.
yeah. And to
Uh,
even build on that, right? Like let's say you take somebody who is very adept at doing, either forensics, incident response for an enterprise, where maybe you just have like your own data center and you have your internal people you support. That doesn't exactly translate to cloud forensics and things like
mhm.
that, right? So you could have been very good at that, but that's not aging well these days when more and more is in the cloud.
Right, right, right. Sure. And like when you're working with these types of, again, adversaries, with these types of environments, with these types of requirements, if you will, like you have to be open-minded, right? You have to be able to learn and know that there's something new all the time. All right, I had a question. I think with all those things in mind, if you had one piece of advice to give somebody thinking about becoming a cyber defender, what would be that one thing?
Um, I think it's just to probably embrace that you may not have a lot of flexibility in your lifestyle. It's kind of like the gift and the curse, right? So
Mm,
if you're on call and you need to, respond to an incident at 3 in the morning, like that's part of the job, right? And that's part of earning your stripes as well too. But being involved in those types of situations, that's how you learn as well too. So
mhm.
if you come in very resistant to that, then I would suggest it it's probably not the right fit if that's something you're constantly figuring out a way to get out of. But if you embrace it head on and, this is my job for now and make the most of it, then I think it's those types of people that will get the most out of it.
Right. So you have to have the attitude as well. I agree. Agree with you here 100%. Well, along those lines, what made you choose cybersecurity? If not a secret, of course. How did you end up?
Yeah. So I began studying computer networking, and I remember we had to write a 5-year plan, and I came across it years later. And I think at the time I was saying I'm almost done. I'm gonna get my CCNA, and then eventually I'm gonna be a CCIE, and blah blah blah. um, and then I said also, I'm kind of interested in security because I think that's gonna matter, forever, right? So that was kind of the college experience. And then when I got my first full-time job, it was a rotational job. So 6 months in, I got put in a role in security and compliance, and really just fell in love and stuck with it ever since. So I guess some of it was a little bit serendipitous, but I think beyond that, job security kind of factored in as well too. But also, I think I really like just the notion of being able to do something very technical and something that would challenge me.
Right. But you described also a lot of challenges and a lot of cool things about the profession and anything like that. But like one thing that stuck with me, and I'm pretty sure we've all most likely done our due diligence at the night shifts at the knock or sock or similar things and all that stuff. So like you mentioned something that again stuck with me. You said the 3 a.m. shift, or if something happens, you need to actually respond to it and all that. So like, is there anything scarier than that? Actually, we could be stopping for a person from pursuing a career in cybersecurity, or that's like the max level.
Um, yeah, I'd say, that's, I'd say that's probably as scary as it gets, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, if you take it from the perspective of kind of the first incident responder, so you're getting a call, you're not even awake yet, and like you have to turn on your brain and start kind of assessing the situation and getting valuable information, and maybe even waking up other people.
Right.
And there's plenty of chaos. It's something that I would guess people would fear even more than public speaking. Like if anybody's ever done one of the simulated incidents, and I'm blanking on the term for it, but more or less a simulated incident where they have a script and they're injecting things, and they can make it as chaotic as they want.
Right.
It's really a stress test. That's when people kind of lose it. So like any incident that mimics that, that's really about as bad as it gets, because you have to try and maintain some kind of calm, feel like you're continuing to make progress, have
Mm-hmm.
a plan, keep other people on task. That's as heavy as it gets.
So don't give in into the chaos of it. Just be in control and like kind of push forward,
I mean
so to
that's
speak.
that's my philosophy. Maybe some people might get better results just screaming at everybody. I don't know, but
I don't think that's been successful, so at least so far from what I hear.
yeah.
uh, cool. Tony, final question. Would you like to give a shout out to somebody, to a mentor that helped you, or the person that gave you your first job? Anybody?
Um, Yeah, yeah. So I think while I was in school, I did have several teachers there that encouraged me quite a bit, and I think had a really good influence on my career progression and things like that. Once I was actually in the workforce, though, one of my mentors, TK Balaji, um, he was somebody that mentored me, not necessarily from a technical perspective, but just from the standpoint of, being somebody new in the workforce and understanding, where I could go, what my aspirations were, addressing, just challenges of being somebody new in the workforce. I think he's somebody that really gave me a good compass for how to navigate my career.
Got you. Well, we thank him too, because apparently you would have not been here today if that he helped you out. So much appreciated. Tony, thank you very much for being with us today. Much appreciate your experience sharing and being part of the Blue Team as well. So please keep on doing what you're doing and help the Blue Team. A pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for celebrating and honoring the defenders with Blue Team Diaries. You can find this and all our previous episodes on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. If you're interested in learning more about our sponsor, Stamus Networks, please visit stamus-networks.com.